So, Rachel, I just want to let you know it's Mary. So there's
Yes,
something wrong with my camera. So my camera is on the laptop, but it's usually on my computer. So that's why you're seeing, if I turn this way, then I can't see you.
that's okay.
I'm working on it. Thanks.
Live streaming.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the public. This is the meeting of the Ed Policy Committee of the Maryland State Board of Education. We have 3 items on our agenda this afternoon. We have the proposed pre-K4 early learning science standards, the state superintendent's guidance on telehealth, and adoption of teacher licensure foundations of teaching reading assessments. So we will begin today with our pre-K to 4 science standards, and I believe Mr. Carey, you are presenting the standards.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, apologies, 1 second. I just want to start by saying I really appreciate the time to present this to the Policy Committee and before President Michael. So what we have today is a draft of the pre-kindergarten for science early learning standards, which work to continue the great work that started with the early learning standards from birth to 3, which were approved by the board in March of 2024. We know that the pre-K4 programs that children are in Maryland are varied, including Head Start programs, child care centers, family child care homes, and faith-based settings. And the pre-K4 science standards are written to showcase that range of learning settings and experiences that illustrate the diversity of learning contexts across the state. So today's presentation, I'll be going over the background of those early learning standards that I mentioned and the work to create the pre-K4 science early learning standards, in addition to an overview of the standards themselves, the process for engagement and development, our next steps, and of course, I'm happy to pause along the way for any questions or needs for additional context.
Thank you.
So the pre-K4 science early learning standards, again, build on that, build on the adopted early learning standards for children birth through age 3. These standards align with current brain science and learning along with child development research. The key here is understanding that these standards are guided by research and acknowledge that all students are capable of learning sophisticated science and engineering concepts and engaging in disciplinary practices. Beyond this, these standards are really guided with the knowledge that children learn through play, exploration, and discovery, that they thrive in environments intentionally designed to support meaningful science learning, that children have unique experiences and diverse strengths, and that children too draw from their family and community experiences as they make sense about the world around them. So taking this into account, these standards provide a unique opportunity to acknowledge the agency of our students, families, and communities, and to ingrain that into standards for our youngest learners. So this is a timeline related to the early learning guidance and standards in Maryland, dating back to 2004, and as recently as March 2024, again, when those early learning standards from birth to 3 were adopted. So this is a slide giving that overview of the gap between the early learning standards from birth to 3 and then to the next generation science standards. So the pre-K4 science early learning standards really are intended to build a bridge between the learning expectations described in the pre-K3 indicators of the early learning standards, specifically aligning going from the strand for science, technology, and engineering and bridging that to the next generation science standards, which Maryland is an adopter of currently. Those standards span from kindergarten through 12th grade. So the need for the pre-K 4 science early learning standards occurred because science did not specifically have a previous pre-K 4 science early learning standard that was informed by contemporary best practices and research. And it's important to note that Maryland's not the only state that that encountered this issue. When we reviewed the national landscape, there are many examples of how standards were constructed for this grade and age range specifically. So again, our work started with the early learning standards, and those standards include the early cognition and STEAM domain, and within that is the science, technology, engineering strand. Within strands of the early learning standards, there are the standard themselves, the example, and then in practice strategies. And as we transition to our standards, the pre-K 4, this organization was continued. So this is an example of the pre-K 4 science early learning standards. And just to note, in the standards document that you have, those start on page 22. So these strands of the pre-K 4 science early learning standards align to the NGSS, or the next generation science standards. And the examples, and again, the examples and in practice strategies mirror that of the early learning standards from birth to 3. Beyond the bridging of the early learning standards to the NGSS, these standards do something special. The standards take a funds of knowledge approach, which includes references to children making connections to their prior knowledge and experiences at home and in their communities, along with acknowledging historically underserved groups by showing how children may use their home language to communicate, and strategies for educators to honor children's home language as well. In addition to that, these standards and the in practice strategies reference how children can communicate their ideas and understanding using diverse ways of expression, which may include drawings, graphs, and models. Really, this has been an exciting project to work on along with our partner and expert committee. And the standards in a lot of ways serve as a national model for how rigorous standards can foster inclusivity in our classrooms. And then completing that bridge, our standards, while not a part of the Maryland Next Generation Science Standards, bridge to it. And the big shift here is that in kindergarten, and based on research, the standards are fully three-dimensional, with a practice, cross-cutting concept, and disciplinary core idea associated with each standard. When we get into our process for engagement and development, it's important to note that the planning of these standards began back in the fall of 2023 in collaboration between the Division of Early Childhood and the Office of Teaching and Learning Instructional Programs and Services, initially collaborating and providing input on the early learning standards. And this was followed by a convening of a committee for the expert stakeholders, and then kicking off that process from March 2024 and closing it up in September, this past September. This is a list of all the individuals that participated in the expert committee, and includes broad representation across the state and across roles. So this includes teachers, specialists, coordinators from both elementary science and early learning backgrounds. This was a big focus with Dr. Cook and I, because we recognized that really this was a bridge. And what we heard from community members is that the pre-K 4 science standards, that they were early learning standards. And so that meant really leveraging a wide range of expertise from across the state. Here's our process for the actual development of those standards, which started with the national landscape analysis and continued with multiple meetings to review and provide input along the course of development. In that landscape analysis, we pulled examples from across the country and actually shared them, engaged in really professional learning with our expert committee. So they understood the landscape and were able to identify components of those standards or areas for improvement that could guide ours. And then finally, when we get to next steps, we will be completing the alignment document. As I said, that this is a draft set of standards, so you may have noticed on page 12, there's still an image that needs to be input there, and that's going to be included between WestEd and our comms team. Once that's done, we'll of course present the standards at the December 3rd board meeting. And then in alignment with the standards and frameworks validation committee process, we'll have a 30-day public comment period, followed by a presentation of the final version to the full Maryland State Board of Education. We'll create an alignment document. And I think a really important part of this process is working in collaboration with the Division of Early Childhood to develop professional learning and thinking intentionally about the many settings for pre-kindergarten in the state. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions.
It's also helpful if I unmute. If you could please take the presentation down so that I could see if people have their hands up for questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions or comments? I did have one comment that I absolutely loved, that one of the first things in your guiding principles is the idea of it being aligned to play and the brain science, that children at this age are wired to learn through play and authentic engagement with the world around them. And I love that that's one of your guiding principles. I had one quick question, and it may be that this isn't really even the place for it, but you referenced STEAM a couple of places in here, and that STEAM has that arts component. And I didn't see any arts teachers or any arts stuff in the framework. But is that going to be addressed in the redo of the art standards? Is that why there isn't anything there? I just thought with STEAM being referenced that I might see something with the arts, but this may not be where you're planning to put it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So in the early learning standards from birth to 3, there was that STEAM strand.
Mhm.
The transition here and what we're working on or presenting is specifically the pre-kindergarten for science early learning standards. So it's specific to science. I can't speak to the pre-kindergarten art standards, but I'd be happy to connect with Lizzie Devereaux, who's our director for that area.
Mm-hmm. No, I was just curious because you mentioned STEAM, and I didn't know if we were, and in this case, it sounds like you're transitioning out of STEAM into more like STEM. And so that's what I was just trying to get a sense of that. So thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
No problem.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. And this was listed as an information only. So we look forward to seeing you at the December 3rd meeting and presenting to the full board.
All right. Great. Look forward to it. Bye.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have the State Superintendent's guidance on telehealth. And I believe that Ms. Gable, you are presenting telehealth.
That is true. Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen. So you should have 3 documents from me. You should have the telehealth guidance, superintendent's guidance, a transmittal, And you should have received just this week a PowerPoint which mirrors the guidance and will enable me just to walk through the guidance for you and then respond to any questions. So I am going to share that. My computer has been deciding to be crazy, but or contrary, I should say. So we hope that
You're up.
I'm good. You can
Yeah.
No,
see.
it's not. If you can make it bigger, put it in presentation mode. So it's big.
Okay, let's see what I can do with this.
So slideshow should be slideshow
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then from beginning. Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Bing, bing. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. And thank you. So let's talk about the guidelines and guidelines for, I want to, will be specific in the very beginning. And it is about participation in telehealth appointments in secondary schools. So with that, we're going to take a look at background, historical perspective, definitions, and LEA and the policy. So let's do introduction first. So telehealth, we know what telehealth is. Many of us have participated in it. This particular bill and that was passed during the General Assembly is about allowing telehealth appointments to occur during school. So telehealth has all the benefits of not having to go to the doctor, being able to do that telehealth appointment. That being said, within a school day, it brings its own to-dos and the own challenges. Requires the LEA, so in the second bullet, you really focus on to consider the logistical challenges, to develop procedures, and they might include appointment scheduling, logistics, coordination with the school schedule. How does the schedule go? Getting consent, space availability, availability of school staff, and procedures for missed instruction, because if the student is not in class, then they're missing instruction. The bill was House Bill 522, telehealth appointments, state guidelines, policies, and access. And it became statute signed by the governor, 4-143. It requires two agencies to work together. That is in particular MSDE and also MDH. And we were to develop state guidelines for school health services that addresses the availability of student participation in telehealth appointments, and in particular for secondary schools. So it's for middle and high schools. It is not for elementary schools. And there really were three things that the guidelines are required to do. And the guidelines are required, the LEAs have a requirement to start in the 25-26 school year, although we had a December 31st, 2024, my lights are going out, deadline for doing the guidelines. And that is that we adopt and implement a student telehealth policy, or that the LEAs do, I'm sorry, and the local boards of education for 25-26. To adopt and implement a student telehealth policy that is aligned with the guidelines that you've read, that should be published in the student telehealth policy needs to be in the student handbook, and of course in whatever communication the LEA can share it, and make sure school personnel, parents, guardians, students are aware of the policy, the objectives, and the requirements. So the limitations on that are in the bill. It says certain things. It does not prescribe how the LEAs are going to set up their telehealth policy. It doesn't say you have to do it this way or that, as long as they're consistent with the guidelines that we're going to be asking for your approval. The LEAs have flexibility in developing that policy. It does not, important piece, require a school to construct an addition or a new space to a school to provide a private space to implement this student telehealth policy, or alter the responsibilities of the healthcare provider. So there's one healthcare provider taking care of all the students and regarding the disclosure of medical records. So what did we do? We did work together and we established a work group. And the work group was very specifically selected for the roles that they play, a diverse group of stakeholders. They have expertise in school health services, physical health, mental health, behavioral health, policy, and of course, leadership. We reached out so prior to establishing the committee, we reached out to a number of groups. So just even in my division, we meet with behavioral health coordinators. So when we met with them, we talked to them and said, here's the bill. What are your thoughts? What are your suggestions? What are your recommendations? We reached out to supervisors of school counseling. How will that impact you? Supervisors of pupil personnel and social work, school psychological services supervisors, school health services coordinators, and other folks. So we got a lot of input, which we shared with the committee, the work group, when they began meeting. We also conducted a survey to determine which LEAs were currently implementing telehealth policies. So here's the work group, which you saw. We did integrate all the folks, but we have, just to highlight, so we had a psychologist, we had a school counselor, we had a pediatrician. We, of course, had to integrate MSDE, so we needed input from Sean for IT. We had two attorney generals, one MSDE, so Amanda is actually on the call, and Bethan, who is from MDH. So we had both of them, and we had many questions for them, and they collaborated on responses. We had school administrators, we had a couple of counselors, we had a core director of student services, and a lot of repeats of folks. But I wanted to just share with you, Linda Riddleman, by the way, as I look through MDH, she's Medicaid. And as I said, we had a high school principal, and we had a superintendent, Dr. Simmons, who represented not only himself, but PZAM. We invited President-elect from Free State Parent Teacher Association. So we had a number of folks that we felt that they would represent themselves and also give input from their organization. So one in the document, you'll see we very specifically wanted to, let's talk about telehealth and what it is. Let's talk about how those appointments may occur. How does a telehealth appointment occur? It's either parent or student initiated, and we'll share some of the law on that, or it could be school practitioner initiated telehealth. And that's because some of our schools have school-based health centers and do have telehealth that's part of a program that they are already offering. So what are the elements? There were 6 major elements that we looked at and that we combined some to address, and you see those before you, and we'll talk about those more in depth. Focused on a couple of important things when developing the policy of what the LEAs need to consider when they take this guidance and then work from, say, January through June and then the summer to communicate, to get ready for the school 2025-26 school year. And again, it is for secondary, middle and high school students. We have to address access to appointments. I mean, all the logistics this committee talked about, discussed the groups before. What are going to be the logistics? How is it going to be scheduled? Are we offering it every day? What times of the day? How is the student going to get out of class? What kinds of appointments? How long are the appointments going to be? How often are the appointments going to be? And all of these things are considerations that the LEA is really going to look at. We are not The bill doesn't legislate it, nor is the state legislating how, but we are saying these are the things that you will need to consider as you develop your policy, your LEA policy. Also must think about confidentiality. So if we have a student who is, there's a space that's been identified, but that student needs privacy, confidentiality. How do we do that? How is the LEA going to do that? And that students and parents will need to, schools and school systems will need to communicate with students and parents to what degree that they can provide that. Student is still going to come out of class, not going to say why the student is out of class, but all of you know what that confidentiality means. Access requires a coordination of services between the parents and school staff. The LEA will need to make sure that they have a communication plan established, procedures, forms, what are they going to be requiring, and that they need to be following any school policies regarding telehealth, such as attendance or, as we said, consent forms. What's the role of the school personnel? There's a lot of concerns about that. What if there is an appointment? There's personnel in the school. How is the student going to, the student may not want to go to the appointment. What's the responsibility of school personnel? Many of you are parents, so you know, might the student, fine. Student says, okay, fine, I'm going to do this. Or maybe there's an appointment where there is upsetting for the student. What are we going to do? How is that going to be addressed? There have to be clear procedures that if there is an emergency, how it's going to happen. How does a student transfer from class to the appointment and back to class? And what are the procedures to reduce or minimize disruption? What's the space going to be? Is it going to be space going to be available? What's the technology that's going to be provided? What about the computer? What about Wi-Fi availability? What about walls that are not physical walls, but IT walls? What about walls? Are they going to be a problem in any? So that's one of the reasons we went to Sean to get recommendations, which you found in the document. What's the collaboration so that they are creating the document with these considerations? What is the written and publicized workflow? How's it going to be happening? Parts of the committee are individuals who have school-based health centers. So how might they operate? What are the benefits? What are things that have been learned? And many schools do not have school-based health centers. And how is that going to happen? And then in summary, what are the policies? Again, the LEAs have to develop and implement their policy by the 2025-26 school year. It must be published. There must be in the student handbook, of course, available, and make sure that parents are aware. I want to give you a little more about the work group, just to explain. We've had about 3 meetings with the work group, did presentations, provided information, broke down in groups. And the final thing that we have done is we have given you the latest draft of the guidelines. We did simultaneously give that to the work group because what we wanted from the work group is, here are the guidelines. We want your thumbs up. This is good. I'm good with this. Or I have some questions, or I have some tweaks. We have got a number of thumbs up. We're good to go. We got one that a link didn't work, so we appreciate that. We always appreciate where links don't work. And third, we had some folks who gave us some tweaks to language, but nothing substantive. So, you know, folks read it, and we had some statements. Well, this statement we think could be clearer. So we have done some of those edits, but they're just clarity edits, nothing that changes anything substantive from what you have. At this point, I was looking forward to see if our superintendent, who was going, I don't know to what degree he shared with Bazam, but we were looking forward to that. We got a thumbs up from the superintendent today. So we have worked, sought input, and put a lot of thought into these guidelines. Specifically that they would be state superintendent guidelines, and we present them to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have regarding the guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to take it down, Ms. McCusker?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, I can do that. I have 3 screens here, and I have to find where my stop share is.
There we go. Okay.
It's on my laptop that was being contrary earlier, but it's behaving now.
Very good. Do we have any questions, comments, Dr. Lewis?
Yes. So as I understand it, and I read through everything, as I understand it, we're basically setting up the guardrails for the process, that there has to be confidentiality, there has to be space, schools have to publicize what they're going to do, etc. And is that all? I mean, that's a lot. I don't mean it that way. But each school district is then going to do all their own policies and procedures around this issue, because I had questions about informed consent. And is this initiated by a student without parents' consent, or is this with parents' consent? And then what kind of appointments are there? Because there's all sorts of health issues that could come up, that thousands of different types of health issues. So I was just trying to process what that looks like in a school and who truly is giving the consent. So is that up to the local school system to put those policies in place?
So all of those questions, we have grappled with every one of them, and all of your questions are really, really good questions. So first we had to grapple with, what is the bill saying? First, some thought it was saying that the LEA, the school, is going to offer telehealth. We're going to set it up. We're going to have, do we have equipment, as some school-based health centers have, as you well know.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at the bill. We went to Amanda many times, as she knows, and we also went to Bethan. This bill is, we are confident, is about scheduling appointments. The permission is twofold. One is that a parent is going to give permission. So you've got a child. The child has an appointment with a pediatrician. Mom, dad sets up an appointment with the pediatrician, and it's going to be they want it to be at 1 o'clock. It's going to be a 15-minute appointment. There's going to be a procedure that the LEA has to establish, what those procedures are going to be to schedule that appointment. They may say it's going to be every day, all day, anytime. They may say it's going to be certain days for certain hours. The permission is going to be that mom or dad provides the permission for this appointment to take place. Mom or dad may come to the school or may not be at the school. The second way, and that is in your guidelines, the second way is a student, and this is part of COMAR, and of course I can't find the page, but is a student who is 12 years or older may schedule an appointment.
It's page 5.
Yep.
Thanks.
I have it up.
Actually, my thumb was on it finally when I was looking up. Thank you. but it's a 12 years or older, a student can schedule an appointment. So might a student schedule an appointment? They can.
But it
And-
says specifically in that, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. It says specifically in that paragraph for mental treatment of mental or emotional disorder. There's some specificity to that statement that a minor child who is 12 years or older. So
I'm sorry.
If I might interject, it's a good question and one I know that they struggle with, but I think the important thing to remember is the way that the law is set up around consent for minors and consenting to their own treatment, that determination about whether they're able to consent or not, and whether it is a one of the carved out areas of treatment in which they can consent, that's determined by their healthcare provider. So in a situation where a child is engaging in treatment from a private provider, it's not really the school that's making a determination. It's the healthcare provider under the law who's making a determination about whether or not that child is able to consent to their own treatment.
So hypothetically speaking, if the provider didn't consent to that, they wouldn't be scheduling a telehealth session because they wouldn't think that student has the capacity at that point to do it independently. Is that what I understand? Okay. And it's paid for?
Parents. Totally. It's not a school appointment.
So it's parents as usual. Okay. It's a lot. It really is. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
So I just had like a really quick question about that. And if like a student like initiates the appointment themselves, are the parents still notified about it, or is that like up to the LEAs, or is that like I guess yeah, like would the parents still be notified if the student like schedules the appointment themselves, or like how would you handle like I guess conflicts between like consent between the parents and the student?
So I think it's important to understand that there is consent that happens to receive treatment, right? And communications that happen between a healthcare provider and their patient. And in a private context, like that is completely between the patient, which in this case would be the child or the student, and their healthcare provider. So the LEA is not going to be handling any of the healthcare records for that child, right? Like in that context where it's like a private provider. In an LEA, what kind of records there may be are educational records subject to FERPA around like attendance. So like if Amanda's mother or if Amanda as a student seeks out an appointment and then she misses class, she's going to have an attendance record for her class, right? So attendance records maybe are subject to FERPA. So that's a different area. That's a different law than what governs the confidentiality between a patient and their healthcare provider, which is why this gets very complex. And I know that the departments have advised the LEAs that they certainly, in drafting their policies, should be consulting with their legal counsel to make sure that they're thoughtful in their language about that.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Michael, did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, Ms. Gable addressed this, but I just want to lift for us and for the public. So this is a really unique action we're taking. We, by practice, do not approve guidance, superintendent guidance. There is very specific language that was called on that says that we need to approve guidance. And so this is a special case. Typically, it would come through to us as a policy, but it's got a different flavor to it, and we are called to approve it. So just reminding us all of that. It's got a different tone. Kim, you were, Dr. Lewis was hitting some of this in terms of this feels more like, are we doing policy? Or not? This is truly guidance, but we are called by the legislature to approve it, whereas typically guidance would be simply sent out by the superintendent.
And there are, thank you, Dr. Michael. That's really a unique and important point. So there are like two deadlines and a have to. One is that we were to develop guidelines by December 31st, 2024, that the LEAs need to develop their policies based on the state guidelines for the 25-26 school year. And then to Dr. Michael's point, there's this line and it says the state board shall adopt the state guidelines developed under paragraph 1 actually of this subsection. But so that's the uniqueness. So we've gotten questions, as everyone knows. Well, are you bringing the policy and the regulations forward? We've said no. And well, why not? Because it called for guidance. But then does it have to go to the state board? Well, yes, it does, because it says on another line, another section, that it goes to the state board. And so that's where you are. We have tried to develop thoughtful guidelines. And that's why it was really important that we had parents and we had doctors and we had PZAM and we had school counselors and we had school psychs, because, you know, if you had a long time, you would ask 50 more questions, because I can see in Dr. Lewis' expression, and had the pleasure to work with her before when she was at MSDE. I know she's like, really? But, and that's why we've worked with Amanda and Bethan so closely to try to create the guidelines in such a way that it provides guidelines, it provides consideration, but it doesn't overprescribe and it doesn't overprovide, and it gives the LEAs the ability, because they have concerns about what is this going to require, and we could go down that road of all the, you know, which, believe me, we've gone down the road. We've had multiple drafts. How strong how's the language? Are we being too prescriptive, Amanda? And we've had many back and forths, and what we've tried to do is land on a right balance and include the benefit of the consideration, along, of course, with yours as a state board.
And if I'm understanding correctly, there's no approval process for MSDE to approve the LEA plan. This is our guidance. The law says you need to have a plan by the 25-26 school year in your handbooks and every place else. But we're just giving them the guidelines, and then it's up to them. Nobody's approving their plans or saying, yes, this plan's within the guidelines or anything like that.
It says, Ms. McCusker, that just, you know, it says what the state board has to do. It says what by 25-26 that the
right.
specifically have to, and it does also, and they have to do the things that we've already mentioned. And it does ask the department to provide technical assistance to a county board to establish the student telehealth policy required. So that's what, in terms of asking what is our responsibility. And of course we would, and I'm sure will provide what we typically do, webinars, and give the LEAs the benefit of the kinds of conversations that we've had, and it, you know, that we will provide technical assistance to the LEAs, the county board, to establish student telehealth policy that's required.
Okay. Dr. Michael.
And I think we should just loop back and say it is well within our authority to ensure that policies are within the guidelines that we provide. So while there's not a formal review process, that technical assistance, should a policy not fit within our guidelines, it will be well within the superintendent's authority and ours to be working with those school systems.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so even though we don't have a full quorum here this evening, we're still going to take a vote just so that we can send a recommendation to the board for our December 3rd meeting. So the superintendent has requested that we recommend adoption. So I'm going to go ahead and take the vote. If you are in favor of recommending adoption to the full board, please raise your hand and say aye if you're a committee member.
Aye.
Right.
Okay, that motion passes and we will move that recommendation forward to the board. Thank you so much, Ms. Gable. I appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you very much.
And we are finishing up this evening with teacher licensure, and that is Kelly Meadows. Ms. Meadows, there you are. Good evening.
Good evening. I hope everyone is well tonight. All right, so this item is, as Ms. McCusker shared, about teacher licensure assessments. And it's a little bit different than what you're used to hearing, because this is actually a request to adopt an additional option for an assessment for reading instruction. So as you all know, we require that our teachers at initial licensure demonstrate their mastery in teaching reading aligned to the science of reading. And for many years, we have used the Praxis Teaching Reading Elementary, or the TREE assessment for that purpose. And that is a great test. It is aligned to the science of reading, and we are not recommending that we stop using that assessment at this point. However, there are other assessments on the market, specifically the Foundation of Reading Assessment that is published by Pearson Evaluation Services, that basically does the same thing. And the reason that this is important is because currently 13 states are using or requiring, either use it as an option or require the Pearson Evaluation Systems Foundations of Reading Assessment. And what that means for Maryland as an import state, where we're importing 50 to 60% of our teacher workforce, is if we bring someone in that's teaching early childhood, elementary, special education, or ESOL, we're going to have them take another test, even though they may have already taken that Foundations of Reading assessment where they are being prepared. And so in the spirit, again, of eliminating barriers that are unnecessary, we are asking the board to consider adopting this Foundations of Reading assessment as an additional option for those teachers that do have to take the assessment for initial licensure. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Dr. Lewis?
Not a question, just a comment. I very much appreciate the thought of eliminating barriers to recruiting teachers into our state. So I am extremely supportive of this action.
Thank you.
Ditto. Okay, any other questions or comments? Oh, Dr. Michael?
Ms. Meadows, can you just assure for us, or give us a little bit more about how this, assure for us that we're not lowering the standard here, that this is simply a different measure, and how specifically we can be confident that this is supportive of the science of reading and rigorous standards in literacy.
Absolutely. So I do have a framework for the assessment. I didn't want to bog you down with materials. I'm happy to provide that framework as part of the board materials for December. Hold on, and that framework, what you're going to see in that framework is it breaks down the parts of the assessment. So you've got, like, I'm looking at it. So for example, Foundations of Reading Development, you're going to see multiple choice. That's 35% of the assessment. Development of Reading Comprehension is going to take up 27% of that multiple choice piece of the assessment. Reading Assessment and Instruction is an additional 18%. So a total of 80% multiple choice in those three areas, which, as we know, all of those are aligned assigned to the science of reading. There are open response. Another 20% of the assessment is open response. So very similar to the Praxis version, where it's a combination of constructed response and multiple choice, which is important. So looking at that open response section, foundation of reading skills is 10% and reading comprehension is 10%. So and then the framework goes into detail about all of the objectives and competencies that test taker has to demonstrate. So again, I'm happy to provide that documentation as part of the documents in December.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so again, the superintendent is requesting that we recommend adoption to the broader board. So I'll go ahead and take that motion. All in favor of recommending adoption to the broader board of the Teacher Licensure Foundations of Teaching Reading Assessment, adding on the Pearson, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and that passes. We will recommend adoption. Thank you very much. And I believe that wraps up our meeting for this evening. I thank the public for tuning in this afternoon and for their kind attention. We look forward to seeing everyone at the December 3rd board meeting at MSDE. We do not have the next Ed policy meetings on the calendar yet, but when we have them, they will be posted on our website, on the MSDE website. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.